thank the Lord for his faithfulness unto us. Thank the Lord that he loved us so much that he was willing to die for us. And with that, can change the course of history in our lives and in the lives of our entire families as we live faithful to the Lord. It is yet the most productive and effective way to live righteous and to make a change. There have been many successful changes that have come to pass in the lives of persons and in the world. We have electronics that can detect any number of things. They have chips we can even put in our animals, and if they're found, you can read it, and they say, well, this little or this big, our dogs are rather big, this big dog belongs to someone. And that chip can be in the animal at all times. We can travel around the world. It used to take so many weeks, months, and days, weeks, months, and sometimes years to travel around the world. Well, we can now communicate around the world within about 5 seconds. But there yet is not a development except Jesus' love that will cause us and give us power to walk righteously. That has not been an invention that will cause the heart of a man to be transitioned so that they can live righteous and holy in the sight of God, except Jesus' love. And it's important for us to be reminded of this on a regular basis, because if we're not experiencing that, we are indeed living beneath our privilege. God has designed the very best for his creation, and we are his creation. God has designed it so that we could experience a productive life. We could experience the joy of God in our lives. We could experience the comfort and strength that in spite of wickedness around us, we could stand for righteousness within ourselves. In other words, human beings, desire to be with other human beings. And because of that, God has created us to be connected and to love each other. And so if someone starts living in a way that's not the right way, it can impact those around them, but he has designed it that with true righteousness, we don't have to do that. We don't have to go that way. And this begins in preschool. We can be impacted by those around us. In elementary school, I remember there was a little girl, I don't know if she was younger than me, we were all in kindergarten, and she didn't color real well, at least in my mind. She would just put pretty colors on the page, and the teacher would respond to her with appreciation. And so I decided, well, if that's what gets praise, I'm going to color just like her, which wasn't coloring, it wasn't drawing. But that was probably the best this little girl could do, and the teacher knew that and complimented her. The point I want to make in telling this story is that I was just influenced by those around me. And it began in kindergarten. And eventually, I remember my mother taught me to read. So by the time I was in first grade, I used to, I don't know if children, if they teach like this now or not, they put us in a little circle, and we all sat on our little seats, and she'd ask this child to read and this one to read, and I thought, oh, she doesn't have to call on them. They can't read it. I can. Why don't you just call on me? I didn't understand that was all a part of the teaching process. But the point is how aware we are of our surroundings. And the Lord blessed that down through the years, we lived out in the country house from Truxton, where our city library was. I don't know if that was 10 miles or not. I don't know. But it was a distance because we couldn't go every day. But our family, somebody would make trips into town. Every once in a while we got to go. But I remember they would bring stacks of books home for me to read. And as a result, I became a reader. Our environment impacting where we are and what we did. And so that was my greatest joy, was to have a stack of books. And back then, the children's books were, I guess, about a half inch at most. But they'd bring a stack, and I'd read every one. And so as a result, I was impacted by that environment. So as we get older, when we hear the Word of God and we see persons living righteous, that impacts us. That gives us an understanding of God and what is important to Him. God created man out of love. God created man with a desire to bless him. And He spent many generations giving a guidance, a directive on how to live righteous. And the very fact that we are in this setting is because someone in our lives loved God enough, and it generated an environment where we could seek God. There are many people that do not have that environment. When we seek God, righteousness is being like God. Righteousness is having God in us. Did I spell that correctly? I didn't stand back and look at it. Righteousness. Oh, come put it in, please. Oh, wait, where?
After the righteous.
Yes, thank you. I can do that, I think. I forgot to stand back and look at it because I'm kind of up under it. I had the teacher write it. It might have been a little more uniform here. But the point is true righteousness is having a true knowledge of God. Yes, when we have a true knowledge of God, have Jesus in our hearts, just like the song said, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. He has designed it that we could have an experience with God, a relationship with God, that would in turn guide us to a place of power, that power being within ourselves. There are arsenals of fuel, jet fuel, that can send a rocket into space, and that with the technology that is developed, it travels so far our minds can't even comprehend it. But even that power will not keep a man righteous if he does not have God. True righteousness translates to power in us to live free from sin. And when we do that, when we understand that, we have at our disposal one of the greatest arsenals known to man. And the way the world can find that and hear that is by how we live. Our living righteous is what communicates to the world. You don't have to commit sin. You don't have to lie. You don't have to mistreat someone else. You don't have to be dishonest with your fellow man. In other words, when you are righteous, you have power by the grace of God to stand for what is right, even when there are those around you doing other things. Now let's begin here in the Old Testament, Isaiah, the 33rd chapter. We'll begin reading at the 15th verse. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. You know what that verse makes me think of? I don't know if children sing this song nowadays, but when I was a child, we used to sing a song. Watch your eyes, what they see. Watch your ears, what they hear. There's a Father up above looking down in tender love. Watch your eyes, watch your ears, watch your hands, what they do, or something like that. And we used to sing that. Well, we sang it as children, but the world, all of us, adults, need to know that by God's grace, we have power to watch our eyes and watch our ears and to stand righteously and to love faithfully and to do the will of God by his power. This is the power that's granted. We don't have to be bound by the world and the many wrongdoings that they participate in. And one of the things, I think in this generation, they may still say that everybody does it. That doesn't make it right. True righteousness gives us power from on high to do the right thing, to do what is right and pleasing to God. 16th verse. He that dwell on high, his place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him, his water shall be sure. God will provide to us the power it takes to live true and honest before God. Now, when I was a youngster, quite young, I remember we lived out in the country, kind of like our road where we live now, but it was a longer road there. And you'd have young men, they'd get out there, they figure, well, there's less traffic out here, and they'd race their cars and try to see, and the whole point being, I have more power in my car than you do. But what God would like us to put that effort toward is power in our lives. To seek to please God with the power that is generated, because if we had the statistics, it would be heartbreaking to know how many young men, young women, young mothers and fathers find themselves in a compromised state because they did not take the power that God gives us to live free from sin. And the serious thing about that, when young men and women, young fathers and mothers, even middle age, it goes to all, do that, they not only compromise them, but they have the possibility of affecting generations. And so, but true righteousness can change the course of the world where you are. True righteousness can. I had lived might have been almost an adult, and I realized my father, he was a wise man. He was very conscientious, very sensitive, and he and my mother were a couple of great faith. I never thought about what their environment had been way back in Oklahoma, out in the woods where they lived. But they heard the gospel preached, and they got saved as young people. Young, I think my father was 6. I can't remember now how old my mother was. She could have been 10 or something, I don't know. But whatever the case, it gave them power in the first third of our century to live righteous in spite of all that was around them. As I've shared with my children, My father was born less than 50 years out of slavery. But with that, he chose to live righteous. And this is very important. It set the course of a generation upon generation upon generation upon generation. There are some that came after him that did not choose to live righteous. But God has blessed us, those that have sought him, with power from on high. True righteousness generated power. It wasn't that there was less distresses and less concerns. They didn't have motor cars, even not many, even in 1932 when he became 20 years old. They had cars, but they weren't as readily available. But they all had challenges regularly, and they had to make the decision to live righteous. And the reason I say that, sometimes we figure they didn't have anything to do. There was no way for them to get in trouble. But back then, there were those that stood against right and righteous, just like they do in 2016. Yeah. He lived there in the country, and he began to preach the gospel, preach the truth, that God has made a way for men and women to get saved. And he went all through the woods there preaching, and there were those that resented him, telling them that drinking alcohol and various other behavior in their lives was wrong. They resented that. So they waylaid and was going to attack him, and I imagine if they could, kill him. And so he told of a time that he was traveling through the woods, probably returning home. He was in a wagon, and that's why I mentioned, even though cars were invented, he had a wagon. And he was returning home in his wagon. And as he traveled along by himself, I don't know if he sang as much as he did when we were growing up, but it wasn't unusual for my father to sing, and to sing with great energy and effort. And so he was riding along, and he came to a place in the woods where there were young men. Nowadays, I don't know if they heard it back then, but they were gang members. But back then, they were just hoodlums in the neighborhood who decided, we're going to stop this preacher from preaching against us. And I'm paraphrasing the story. And so there he traveled. This is almost 100 years ago. There he traveled. And they stood in the woods ready to attack him, because they probably received word he was coming by there, and he was by himself. And as he traveled by, when they got ready to attack him, they realized he was not alone. He was not by himself. There was someone with him. And so they eventually met up with him later and asked him, who was that with you? And he said, I was by myself. He said, no, there was someone riding with you dressed in white. Who was he? The point being, God has obligated himself for those that choose to live righteous, that he will bless and protect and guide. He will keep us and uphold us. We are not alone. We may feel in this generation that there is nothing that can be done, but God is a God of all power, all might, and he is a God of true righteousness. And so when we seek, even as children, as young adults, when we seek to please God, true righteousness equals power. Whether that power is physically granted to us to run, or God runs with us visibly. True righteousness generates power. We have power to live free from sin. There are times in the world we'll have many people say, but I want a lot of friends. And I've got my children down through the years. I've told them that what they need is, you just need one good friend. You don't have to have multiple friends. One good friend is a great blessing. And if you have more than one, make sure one of those friends is Jesus who died for us. Because he has made a commitment that every boy and every girl and every young person, every mother and father that chooses to live to please him, he will be by their side. He will see them through. There are times all of us want someone to acknowledge that I am special. Well, Jesus did that. His desire was for us to understand what it meant to be loved by someone, loved so much that he could promise he would be our friend and he would never leave us or forsake us. When I was a little girl, you remember certain people when you're in school, just here and there. You remember, not all of them, but you'll remember one or two who was a good friend to you. And I remember when I was about maybe fifth, I don't know what grade, but I was in elementary school, when the Shepherds, my cousins, moved in the neighborhood and lived near our elementary school. I could not believe it, to have family actually going to the same school. I hadn't had that before, except the Harrises, and some of them, were they younger than me? Yeah, they were a little younger than me. And I think Lily Marie and I were the same age, I believe. But anyway, whatever the case, it was special to have cousins that live near. Well, Jesus wants us to feel that special, that I am the one that looked down through generations and knew that boys and girls, men and women, were going to need a friend. And he said, as we had in Sunday school, and I shared, I believe here, the last time I preached here, that when Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, his disciples were his friends. They were his best friends. And they were near with him, and near and dear to him. That's why they were there. But even they got tired. And Jesus wanted to let the world experience a friend who would never leave or forsake. And when the story is told of how he prayed, and then prayed again and prayed again, he was praying for us this day. That we would understand what it meant to live righteous, to have a friend, to live faithful, so that when the time came that we are in a trial, when we are in situations, and all of my children and all of your children and many young people will have a place and a time when they'll have to make a decision to do right. You may go to school every day and you study and do your work and work hard, and that's what we're supposed to do. But then there will come challenges when the person next to you decide that they're going to cheat off your paper, or they decide, here, you can cheat off of mine. You have to make a decision. You have to decide. That's right. You have to decide to do right. And that's why true righteousness, God will give us grace to do what's right. Yes, he will give us grace to do what's right in those times. And many times you'll have people say, well, nobody knows. It's not going to bother anyone. True righteousness gives us power to live right whether we know anyone's looking or not. This is what Jesus wanted, that as we live for him, that whatever our circumstances are, whatever our involvement is, that we would exercise power that he's made available because Jesus is in our hearts, that we're going to do right no matter what. There are times and places that the enemy would like to isolate us, like to decide that, well, no one else is doing this. And 100 years ago, he had power. Today, he has power for us to make the decision, in spite of those around us, in spite of those that are saying to us, don't do it this way. You don't have to make that sacrifice. And this goes for adults who are living in neighborhoods. I remember, let's see, was that our first, I think it was our first home. And I was a young mother, had young children, and I, from time to time, would sit out in my garage with the garage door open. I stopped doing that, but I did. And as it turned out, I was one of the few mothers who stayed at home, so if I did that, then I got the neighborhood at my garage door. So I realized that that was not what I desired, but I desired to observe the neighborhood. So my children, I brought them to the backyard and they start playing there. But we did meet children whose parents did not understand that what you implant in children as little children grows. And we had a young man, he was probably 6 or so, would come over to our house and he'd trample my little flowers I'd planted, and he used language I'd never allowed on the grounds, or let alone in the house, or my husband allowed. And so I thought, well, he's a young child. Let me go share this with his mother. And so I went down the street and shared it with her. And she thought it was funny. She chuckled. He said that? He said that, and he said those words. True righteousness will impact what you say and how you say it. And that little boy wasn't even invited to have it. Do you realize how he behaved then? My heart almost breaks at the thought of how he may be behaving now, because he was so poorly behaved, and his mother didn't have understanding enough to actually try to guide his way, try to guide his pathway. But when you're living in a neighborhood like that, as parents, you have to decide how you're going to live and raise your children. Your children have to decide how they're going to respond to the parents. And so as a result, if we do not follow what God has provided for us, we will find ourselves in a place that we cannot have power to live righteous. Power means that when we are pressed on every side, as a young man I know, when you go to school, particularly, well, when family is, one is older than the other, you might be in one school and another child in a different school, but you're all behind each other. Well, this young man came to school, and there was a young man said, I want to be your friend. Well, where this young man got his 6 packs of alcohol from, I assume he brought it to school in his backpack. And because once you're at school, there isn't a store close enough that you can get off campus. And so he said, well, let's go over here and to this place and let's do this. A 6-pack is 6 cans of beer. And if a parent had a choice, they wouldn't want their children to even be exposed to children that behave like this. But there are children that behave like this. So he came to the realization, the young man was trying to find a spot where we can go hide over here and drink this. Well, before they did, and my son didn't drink any, but before that happened, something caused them to change their direction and to go back into the main campus. And it could have been one of the personnel coming near them. But the point I'm saying is, right in his school, as faithful and obedient as he was, that was a challenge he had at a freshman in high school. He had to make a decision by the grace of God that I am not going to participate in this. I am not going to, even though my buddies are drinking, I am not, or trying to drink, I am not going to be a part of this. This is the challenge. That goes even younger nowadays. And it's also not just cans of beer. There are many things that children will have access to and try to persuade our children to participate. True righteousness can give us strength to withstand. And this particular son I'm speaking of had gotten saved when he was, I think, 10 or 12. And so he was saved at the time. And through righteousness, by God's grace, he was able to make the decision, I am not going to participate in this. And so we are living in a place like this. We're living in a world where many things that we are exposed to, our children are exposed to, and we have to decide, what are we going to do? What decision are we going to make? How are we going to live? But you can remember, true righteousness comes from God, and it equals power. Power to stand for that which is right. And when we understand this, we think of Peter. Many of us have heard of Peter, and many of us have probably heard of the time that Peter was arrested and put in jail. But he wasn't put in jail because he was doing wrong. He was put in jail because he was preaching that which was right. They arrested him, put him in jail, and there he was. And this was the same Peter that when he first started living for God, he had trouble humbling himself, but he continued to pray until God gave him the victory. So when he found himself in jail, we're going to turn over to Acts, the 12th chapter. Now, we may not find ourselves in jail, but we might find ourselves, I don't know if they call them playgrounds anymore, or quads, or whatever at school, where we have friends that decide, well, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, or we're going to behave this way. Well, Peter, after he began to pray and got close to God, he came to realize that Jesus only meant good for him. So he stood up for him. And as a result, he was arrested. And so Peter was arrested. This is over in Acts, the 12th chapter. We'll begin reading about the 4th verse. And when he had apprehended him, this is Peter, he put him in prison, delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. One of the things that concerns us, all of us, is that we do not want people making fun of us. At least I don't. I don't like people making fun of me. But yet, Peter had walked with Jesus and came to realize how much Jesus loved him. So they put him in prison. There he had preached and told the truth, and they put him in prison. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. What they mean is kind of like when I was so sick. Many people chose which time of day they were going to pray for me and prayed around the clock. And so I think this is what the church was doing. 6th verse. And when Herod would have brought him forth the same night, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prisoners. Now this is an extreme case, but it's a good example of Peter deciding he's going to please God anyway. They put him in prison because he had been preaching, and there were people that were not living right, and he told them they weren't living right. So they put him in prison. And so we all know what a chain is. They put big chains on him so he couldn't move, and chained him to 2 soldiers, and then they had a guard outside the prison door where he was. 7th verse. Behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison. And he smote Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. Wow. And nowadays, to get a chain loose, you'd have to get a welding torch or get the key that locks the lock or something. But he said it just fell off because and the angel is the one that tapped him on the side. And the angel said unto him, gird thyself, bind on thy sandals. Do we know what girding yourself means? Does anyone know what girding yourself means? It's like putting on a belt or something, isn't it?
Yeah, there was a drawing that was circulating on Facebook.
A little louder.
There was a drawing circulating on Facebook. Usually there was a longer garment, and they pulled it up and tied it around their waist.
Oh,
That
okay.
means girding your loins.
Girding, okay.
It's a specific fold.
So that you're ready to move.
Yeah.
In other words, not hindered. Okay, did we hear that? So he said, gird yourself. In other words, get ready to travel. It's a particular way you bind your garment around you. And he said, and bind on your sandals. In other words, the sandals had straps and you had to tie them on. In other words, get ready. And so he did, and he saith unto him, cast thy garment about thee. In other words, now get your outer coat, get it on. Now this must have been an amazing thing. Let's see what Peter said after this. And the angel said unto him, gird thyself, bind on thy sandals. So he did. And he saith unto him, cast thy garment about thee, follow me. And he went out and followed him, and wist not that was true, which was done by the angel. In other words, even though Peter was doing all this, he thought he was dreaming. And so in the 9th verse, let's listen closely, it says, wist not that it was true, which was done by the angel, but he thought he saw a vision. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came into the iron gate. Now, hopefully none of us ever have gone to prison. I know we haven't because of something we did wrong, but we have gone to prison because we were ministering to the prisoners. And it's rather an amazing situation because they have many gates, just like they're describing here. And we walked, I remember I had my husband's arm, the children were walking behind us, and each gate we went through, they locked it. And we went through another one, and they locked it. And what Peter is telling here is as they went through all the gates, then they came to the final gate. When they passed the first and second ward, they came into the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of his own accord. Now, Lanaya and Larissa and Talia and little Tyler and Trenton and all of the rest of us, we've gone to Staters and we've gone to Vons and we've gone to stores, and when you walk up, there's a little thing that lets the mechanism know you're there. And what do the doors do? Do you push a button when you go to the grocery store, or you just walk in because it automatically opens, right? Okay, well, let's read that again. When Peter was come to, when they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them on his own accord. And they went out, passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. In other words, he was able, even though he had been in prison and he was locked up, God, in honor of the saints praying. And what kind of prayer were the saints praying?
Prayer of faith.
They were praying the prayer of faith, but there's another word they used. Let's read the 5th verse again. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing. Without ceasing. What that means is when Sister Alicia finished praying, Sister Melissa started praying. When Sister Melissa stopped praying, then Lanaya started praying. When Lanaya stopped praying, then Grandmommy started praying. Grandmommy Louise. And then when Talia, Grandmommy Louise stopped praying, then Talia started praying. And when she stopped, then Larissa. And when she stopped, then Mommy Lisa. In other words, they were praying without ceasing. And do you follow what my title? True righteousness equals power. Power comes from God, not from us, but from God. And God generated the power that we have spent centuries getting to where we could make our Stater Brothers doors open automatically. Well, back there when Peter was in prison, he said the door opened of its own accord. And he came out. And after the angel guided him into the street, he realized, okay, the angel left. And so Peter looked around. When Peter was come to himself, he said, 11th verse, now I know of a surety that the Lord has sent his angel, hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectations of the people of the Jews. When he considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And at this time, Peter came and knocked on the door, and they were on their knees praying at the time. But when they knocked on the door, the maid came, a young lady, to the door and said, who is it? And he said, this is Peter. And she was so stunned, she didn't open the door. She ran back to tell him, there's someone outside that says his name is Peter. Well, they knew he was locked up with all these chains and with all these bondages. And finally, she was able to get her mind back. And as Peter knocked at the door, a damsel came and hearkened, named Rhoda. When she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for the gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. They said unto her, thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was even so. Then said they, it is his angel. But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door, they saw him. They were astonished. What I'd like to point out, in this day and age, there are many people that are locked in the prison of sin, that are bound by drugs, by habits, by lifestyles, by seductions of various kinds. There are people that are bound on both sides, and it's meant for you to never get out of that place. But God has made a deliverance. Just like he delivered Peter out of the prison of these environments, and some of these environments came from generations before, passed down from one family member to another, and you find yourself in that place. Be assured God knows your name just like he knew Peter's name. And aren't we thankful? I know I am, to hear how they prayed without ceasing for his deliverance. And it was so amazing, she didn't even think to open the door. She said, do you all realize Peter's outside? And finally they came and looked in astonishment and realized God has delivered Peter. But there are many people that are bound, that need deliverance, and the only way they can find deliverance is by watching your life. By watching you and realizing there is someone keeping this person. There is someone giving this person power to live free from sin. And we may feel like there are times that people feel like we should have things that we want to see what's happening right now. We want to see what's going on. But God may have a time for us to be in continued prayer until the victory is ours. Till the victory comes for those that are needing. Till the victory comes for those that need deliverance. And I remember one mother saying her son was living in sin, and she prayed 20 years for his deliverance. 20 years for him to find God. And that's why true righteousness generates power. Power for the deliverance of souls, power for souls to be kept, power to keep us in school or wherever we are, power to do that. True righteousness. And what is true righteousness? When we seek God, ask him to forgive us, ask him to help us not to do those things that are wrong anymore, but to live righteously. When we make that decision, then we have access to power from God. God is so faithful to bless us. And if we want, my son wrote a song, let's see, what was it called? I don't know if I know what it was called, but in the verse of the song, he talks about changing the world. And I thought, how can we change the world? He said we can change the world one soul at a time. By praying continually for the blessing of those around us, we can change the world. We can. By living righteously, God will give us power through our lives to change the world of those around us. And the Lord taught me as a mother that if I wanted to change the world, it was going to begin with my children. That I was going to remember and fully understand these are souls. These are precious souls that I died for. And by the life I lived, and my husband, by the life we lived, we could affect the world we are living in. He would give us power to change the world we are living in. He would give us power to have victory in the world we are living in. He would give us understanding and power to stand and withstand. Does not mean that we won't have challenges. We will have challenges all of our life. But true righteousness will give us power to stand and withstand. That there is an environment in the world that wants to take various ones in various directions. But when we seek God, we can live like those there. And Rhoda was a young lady. She was a young girl. A damsel is not, I don't think that you would even call her an adult. She said a young damsel. So this young lady was in that prayer service that night. And she was there praying with them too. And she ran to the door and she saw a miracle. But our lives can generate these kinds of miracles. And sometimes we say, well, I didn't see it today, I didn't see it tomorrow. We are not on a schedule that it has to happen every day. But we are on a schedule of living righteously so that the power of God can work through us. And that means every one of us in the room can change the world we're living in by living righteously before those around us. I think I shared with you, I don't know if I did or not, but the other day, was that about 2 weeks ago, I think I went with my daughter-in-law to the farmer's market. And as I sat there, some of the time I talked with Trenton, and some of the time I was fascinated with, they have such beautiful vegetables and things, and you almost feel like you're eating them by looking at them. But anyway, as I sat there, and there was a man next to me, he had organic eggs, and I said, well, I'll take a few, which they were very good. And so, but he looked at me, he said, oh yes, when I first came, I said, can I sit here? He said, oh yes. I said, all right, I'll sit. I took my chair. Then after a while, he said, are your children around? I said, oh, they're all grown now, but they went to the high school down the road there. Okay, and he'd sell some more eggs. He'd sell them by the dozens. And then he'd come back. He said, he wanted to know, like, what do you do or whatever. Whatever he asked, I'd chat and go on. Then he'd come back again and ask me another question. He said, I know some nice people. I know some nice people. They're black people, and they're very nice. They're in the work in the, what do you call it? In other words, they help run the government there in the city government in Rialto. So they're very nice. And I said, oh, yes, that's wonderful. And he'd come back again. This is like 5-10 minutes between, or maybe even 15. He'd come back again. He wanted to know. He was trying to figure out, who is this lady? I finally caught on. He was trying to figure out she's different somehow, but I didn't register it at first. He was very pleasant, and I was too, I guess. Finally, he said something, and I said, yes, I go to church right down the road there, not far from here, about 5 miles on Baldy Mesa Road. That's where I go to church. I said, I'm the pastor. That's what it is. Oh, my goodness. That's what it is. I knew there was something about you. I was trying to figure out, what is it? There was something. I I felt something. I saw something. There was this peace. I'm trying to record it the way he did. There was this peace, and there was this calmness, and there was this, and I was trying to figure it out. Well, all I was doing was sitting there. But the Spirit of God in us generates power to impact the world around us. And now I didn't say, I never thought about saying, trying to invite him to church or anything. I was just enjoying it. It's like going to, I don't know exactly what, but it's delightful. I guess it's kind of like going to the fair, except you're at the farmer's market. And so I was enjoying the setting, and of course, Trenton had various things he saw and enjoyed, and I was enjoying that too. But this man, his mind was going a whole different direction. He wanted to know, who is this woman? There's something about her. Well, what we want to be about us is true righteousness. That God in his love and mercy, and I don't think, I'll just tell it like it is, I don't think because I was a preacher is why he was impacted. I think it was because I was a child of God. And he felt the righteousness of God in me. And so we have that privilege of manifesting true righteousness, just as Peter did. And we have the privilege to be in an environment that we can grow in, that the Spirit of God in us can manifest itself to us and to others around us. This is our privilege. This is the blessing we have. God knows each of us by name. And as I got a little older, I was injured, should have died, but the Lord spared my life. And as I got a little older and realized what a miracle God performed in my life, I did wonder, Lord, what did you spare me for? And am I doing what you desired of me? And so, but each of us are allowed to live, are allowed to serve God to change the world we're living in. True righteousness generates that power. True righteousness has that impact. True righteousness is meant to bless the world we are living in. What a mighty God we have. What a blessed privilege we have. My desire is that we will be encouraged to serve God, to live for God, to be faithful to God. And we're going to read our opening text one more time. That is, let's see if we have it here. Isaiah 33 and 15. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppression, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes. And that bribes might not be a word that we talk about much for young people, but bribes are when someone wants to offer something to you for you to do wrong. Not to do right, but to do wrong. And they say, I'll give you all this if you'll do wrong. The devil tried to bribe Jesus, and he withstood him as well. That shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears. Remember our song? That stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood. Now, you might think they're just talking about children, but as an adult, I've told people many times down through the years as an adult, I've told them, I don't listen to gossip. I don't listen to hearsay. And this scripture says here, let's see if we can read it again, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood. In other words, horrific and murderous things, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. We are in a time where people would like to try to pretend there is no God. He is, and he's watching. He's keeping a record. They want to mock that which is righteous and that which is good. God is still listening. And I remember living in Ontario, and there weren't many people I knew, but God was still watching and still supporting me in living righteously. And I thank the Lord for that. Was that the last house that grandmother, yes, grandmother Chandler visited us at, I think, was at St. Andrews, I believe. And It is important that we have the Spirit of God in us, in our home, in our spirit. And when we go to school, when we go to work, we will have challenges. We may not be in handcuffs like Peter or chained, but there are environments that are just as challenging. And what broke the chains was praying of true righteousness. Truly righteous men and women were praying, and God delivered Peter. And so we want to understand that. That should encourage us also to have a prayer support that we count on. I remember when I was delivering probably more than one of my children, but in particular, I think it was Aaron. It was Sunday night, and I knew everyone was at Sunday night service, and I was counting on them, praying for me, and he was delivered. That is the privilege we have. When we're truly righteous, God will answer prayer of a righteous man or a righteous woman. God will answer prayer. And so we want to live that. It doesn't mean that because I'm 65 that God has been hearing me so long that he'll answer it. He will answer the prayer of a child. And the Lord taught me this. If I didn't know it before, I got it. When Alicia was going through so much at school, and she worked many hours every day when she came home, probably up to 6 hours worth of homework every day. But we still went to prayer meeting, and so she didn't quite get it finished. And I was so distressed. I said, "Oh, Alicia, you should have just got it finished." She said, "Well, I'm going to pray, Mommy." I hadn't thought of that at that time. I was just distressed. But she said, "I'm going to pray." And she went to school that day, and she said, so when she came home, I wanted to know what happened, because this teacher had already told me, by law, I can keep children, did she say 1 hour or 2 hours after school? Anyway, she said, by law, I can keep them after school. So if a child left without finishing work, she went and got them, brought them back to school, and had them do their work. She was from where, Alicia? Trinidad or Liberia? And education was a privilege, so she didn't let any child forget that. And so if you didn't dot an I or didn't cross a T, now people say that as a joke, but there was no joke with her. She would not accept your paper. I don't care how many sentences you had on it. She would not accept it. And so she was very particular. So when Alicia went to school that day, she said, "I'm going to pray." And so I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, when she collected the papers, she collected everyone right up to the child in front of me, and she went and laid them on her desk. And when she came back, she started collecting with the child after her. She never asked her for her paper. And the Lord let me know that Alicia was his child, and he heard her prayer. God will hear prayer, whatever our age, because he honors true righteousness.